Welcome to this episode of The Psychology of Almost Everything. I'm Stewart Grant.
I'm Peter Thompson.
Today we're going to talk about coaching in sport, and I'm delighted to say that with us is Emily Handyside, who is currently the head coach of the Welsh National Netball team, but also a consultant and mentor of other coaches in a whole range of sport. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
The first question is going to be asked by Peter.
Emily, could you tell us exactly what you do?
Yeah, sure. So as the head coach of the national team, we are preparing the team to play other countries in test series, but also to attend major competitions like the World Cup, which is every 4 years in our sport. It's not an Olympic sport, but we do go to the Commonwealth Games and play World Championships and test series.
And when you say prepare, what does that mean?
So we're in an interesting phase with netball in the UK at the moment. It's just moving towards professional, where the athletes are being paid enough to either primarily be an athlete or work part-time alongside being an athlete. So most of the athletes I'm working with are either doing a day job or training with their clubs, and then I will see them at weekends for camps when we are preparing for a competition. So that might be 5 or 6 weeks prior to a competition. They come to me at the weekends and we have those training camps.
And what happens at the training camps?
So we don't have the privilege of time. We have to squeeze a lot in. So we will do 2 training sessions in a day, and we'll also have off-court sessions. So we'll maybe do psychology sessions, nutrition, performance analysis. In and around that, I'll also have meetings with the players. So we repeat that on Saturday and Sunday. So they're pretty tired by the end of it.
We're psychologists, so we're clearly interested in the psychology sessions. So what exactly happens in the psychology sessions?
It depends on the time of the year. At the start of the year, we do a lot of sessions looking at our culture and the environment, what experiences we want to create for ourselves, how we want to be remembered. So myself and the psychologist will do a bit of planning around that. But essentially, we get the squad in a room and we talk about what's important to us, what's non-negotiable, and we come up with a list of values that we try to live by.
What sort of values?
For example, when we did this process, they listed a lot of things, but there were some similarities. So we sort of put them into buckets and joined them together and then gave a description for that. So for example, we have a phrase, it's called want it, own it, love it, face it. And under each of those descriptors, we have a whole list of words that are meaningful to us. So under wanting it, it's about drive, commitment, and all the sort of behaviours that you would expect to see that underpin that want it phrase.
I mean, presumably this is all in the service of winning matches.
Yeah. We can't get away from the fact that our vision, our aspiration is to climb the world rankings. We're currently 9th and we want to get to 6th. And that's really challenging for a number of reasons that are out of our control, like the world competition calendar. Teams are not obliged to play us. So the teams that are immediately above us at the moment just won't play us. So there are some things that are in our control, like how we prepare and how we perform. And there's just some other tricky stuff that we're trying to navigate, but we try not to focus on that too much.
Tell me a bit about selection.
This year we have a squad of 14 plus some training partners. The process for selection is we have a policy that is available to the athletes that outlines this process. We have a dedicated selection event, so that might be a training camp or a trial, where myself and 2 other people that are identified in this policy are the selection panel, and we have to observe their performance. And then after the selection event, we have a conversation, because it's not just based on performance. There's a whole list of criteria. For example, some of it might be around what linked to the objective of the competition. So at the start of a 4-year cycle, the first competition might be about exposing new players to international netball. So therefore, we might be looking for slightly less experienced, and immediate performance levels might not be the priority. We might be looking more at potential. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the balance of experience and youth in the squad, particularly at the start of a cycle. We'll look at players' team qualities, what we know about them in terms of their behaviour, their attitude, how they would manage themselves. Because when we go to a competition, we're often together for a week or more. You know, you're sharing rooms, you're with each other 24 hours a day. So it's really important that people can manage themselves well off court in the environment, as well as how they perform on court. So that selection meeting will obviously discuss their performance, how people combine, the team dynamics, their readiness to perform or their readiness to be developed and exposed to international competition, and then we arrive at a decision. That then has to be ratified by a board who has to make sure that we've followed a process that has been communicated, so it's transparent and fair. And then after 3 days, that can be communicated internally to the group of athletes.
Does the situation ever arrive where you've got a superb athlete, but their personality is such, you know they're going to be absolutely awful to live with?
I don't think you would arrive at a selection meeting or a selection event with that dilemma, because for me, the selection event and the selection meeting is the end of the process, not the start. So in the year or the training phase that we've had leading up to that meeting, I would have had one-to-ones with every athlete talking about not just their on-court performance, but how they align with our culture, our values, what are their behaviours that they're demonstrating, what's their attitude like, how we think they can move forwards. And if somebody is problematic, in other words, they're not adhering to those things, we would be having that conversation prior to the selection event and probably saying to them prior to that selection event, we don't think you're ready for this. Obviously, we'll consider you and look at you, but you're probably 3 to 5 years away from competing at a World Cup, for example. So it shouldn't come as a complete surprise if we're kind of facing those dilemmas. It's not that anybody's a diva or problematic, but I think athletes, particularly young adults, are navigating their own aspirations. They have their own goals, and sometimes they're so focused on that they lose sight of what the team needs. It can be difficult to manage their own emotions in a performance environment. Added to that, they're young people navigating work alongside being an athlete, navigating relationships, and all of these things get put into a melting pot, which means at times some people just aren't able to manage themselves over a prolonged period of time and therefore aren't ready to go to a competition. But we'd be having those conversations.
And that's great psychology, isn't it? Sorting out problems before they occur. I mean, the reason I'm asking the question is almost every season there's some footballer that blows up in the Premier League, isn't there, or walks off, or there's fallings out and so on. But you seem to have got, I wouldn't say under control, but you're anticipating that.
Yeah, look, I think my view on it is there will obviously be disappointment when you make your selection decision, and therefore you will always get a response from some people. But it shouldn't come as a surprise. So disappointment is okay. Surprise shouldn't happen. If that happens, I think I've not done my job well enough leading up to that.
Who selects the captain?
I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. I've done it in different environments with different groups. With this Welsh squad, when I started the role, we already had a leadership team in place and the captain was already in place, and it was 6 months prior to a World Cup. Now, bearing in mind we have a World Cup every 4 years, to me, it did not make sense to change anything at that point. It was go with consistency and play to the strengths of what was there. At the start of a 4-year cycle, it was an opportunity to look at refreshing how we do things, because if we keep doing things the same way, you keep getting the same results, and we're trying to climb. But also, the whole world have seen us now. We've been to a World Cup. If we keep doing the same, we're going to be predictable. So it's not a criticism of anybody when we change it. It's just you have to regenerate in professional sport. And we made the decision to change the leadership group, but we spoke to the squad about it. We said, this is what we want to do and the reasons why. I actually spoke to the previous leadership group about that before we spoke to the whole squad, so it didn't come as a surprise to them. And then as a group, we spoke about how do we develop leadership? So not how do we identify a leader, but how do we all develop leadership? What does that look like in terms of behaviours? And then after that conversation, it was, okay, well then how do we identify leaders? And do we have a leadership group again? Is it 4 people, 3 people, 2 people? Is it 1 captain? Like, we consulted the group and we spoke about what it should look like. And they wanted a captain and a vice captain that were experienced, and then 2 others in the leadership group that were emerging and potential future leaders. So in that first year of the cycle, we had a group of 4. Then we had to change it again because we had retirements and things like that. So I already had this year captain in mind. She was the co-captain previously. In my mind, she needed to stay. But again, just wanted to sense check it with the group and sense check with them who else they thought should be considered. And I made it very clear that if it wasn't a vote, it wasn't whatever they said we would go with, but whatever they said we would consider. And everybody, without fail, named the same 3 people. And they were the same 3 people that we wanted. So in the end, it ended up being an easy decision. And we went with the captain and 2 vice captains. And it was really aligned. Everybody wanted the same thing.
Sounds as if you've got a culture around this team where all the decisions are absolutely transparent to everyone. But there must be times where you have to exert a bit of...
Yeah, I think coaching is not something that you do to people. It's something you do with people.
Uh-huh.
So if you've got a group of people that are mature enough to have a view and you seek to understand that view, but they also respect the fact that your decision might go a different way, but it's still been important to hear their views. That's the culture I've tried to create. And there are times where I've had to say, thanks for your feedback, but I'm going in this direction and this is the reason why. And I try to be transparent about it. Don't get me wrong, there's still people that don't like the decision.
Sure.
And I think, my job as head coach is to think about what the whole squad needs, what's the long-term vision. When you're asking athletes for their views, they're often thinking about it from their perspective, and they might be thinking about the immediate year and whether they're going to get court time and gain caps. And it's my responsibility to step out of those immediate demands and think bigger picture, longer term. And I don't know that athletes can always do that.
Well, especially because I suppose that their playing lives are relatively short compared to a coach's life, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about motivation? How do you lift the spirits of a team that's had difficulties?
Well, when you're playing international sport, it's never easy and there's always difficulties. And I think a lot of athletes, when they've reached that point, are comfortable with the uncomfortable. There's times when that is tested, particularly when you're in competition. Your results are public. People can see whether you've overperformed, underperformed, and it affects your world ranking. It might affect their potential contracts or opportunities in the future. So although they're comfortable with the uncomfortable, there are certain times when that peaks to a point where we do have to be really proactive about managing it. We try to stay focused on the process. So at the start of the year and the start of the cycle, we talk about our vision, our roadmap of how we might get there. We'll talk about what teams we're going to play and why. Is it different style that we're trying to expose? Is it new players that we're trying to expose? So we talk about objectives of every competition. We'll have outcome objectives, obviously around the result, the types of players that we want to expose and for how long. But we'll also talk about performance goals, process goals, how we want to play, how we want to be remembered, what are our behaviours when we're winning and when we're losing. And we go back to those. So when we lose, or even when we win, but we don't win comfortably. So that happened recently in a test series against Zimbabwe. Our first match was difficult and we didn't play how we wanted to play. And then we had to play them again the next day. So you have a very short amount of time to bounce back. So we also, in those scenarios, try to make sure we review and close off that game that day, even if we play late. So our game was at 7 p.m. We would have been doing analysis and review at 11, 12 o'clock because we need to sort of take the learnings from that, put it to bed and move on the next day. So we've got processes around video analysis that individually they can look at their own performance. We always ask them to pick out things that they've done well. So we use a strengths-based approach. It's important to pick out that stuff. But we might also occasionally pick out one or two quick wins that we can fix for the next day. We also have processes in place that our psychologist has worked on with us. So going back to your first question about what kind of stuff we do, we've spoken about performing under pressure and getting distracted on outcomes and needing to remain focused on the process. So prior to a game, they have a questionnaire that they have to fill out, which talks about what preparation we've done, what are our strengths, what we're going to focus on in the game. And then afterwards, they fill out a questionnaire where it talks about what did we do well collectively and individually? Where was our focus in those moments of pressure? Because we want to really understand, is their focus on how tired they are? Is their focus on the scoreboard? Is their focus on the disappointment? Or is it on the next job, the process? So we are at a stage where our group are developing those skills. We've got a couple of experienced players that can do that, but very much a younger group at the start of the cycle where we're having to really pay attention to developing those skills. So we've put those processes in place alongside our other coaching processes.
That concentration on why the group may not have succeeded, does that kind of counteract any kind of demoralisation?
I think what counteracts it is you have to pick out the positives.
Right.
So we will use objective things like our stats from our performance analysis to say, right, okay, this wasn't good, but look at this was really good. So let's make sure we remember that and we take that into the next game. And here's some easy tweaks that we can make on the stuff that wasn't so good. And we focus on the things that are within our control. So when people are talking about umpires or, maybe there was an issue around the logistics, we just have to say, park that's not within our control and really bring the attention and focus back to the things we can control around our performance.
But if, say, you've been absolutely thumped by a really good team,
yeah,
and people are thinking, gosh, and we've got to play them again, and we're just not in that league, how do you deal with something like that?
So for us, that only happens once every 4 years because we only have a World Cup every 4 years, which is when you have to play people of all varying world rankings In the other years, we will only play teams around us, because obviously if we play teams that are well below us or well above us, that doesn't help us in terms of world rankings. So in the fourth year, which was 2023, when we went to the World Cup, in our pool, we had to play Jamaica, we had to play New Zealand, who are 1 and 4 in the world. And we expected both teams to beat us by 30, 40 goals, and they did. So we spoke in advance as a coaching team, as a management team, how we utilise those games. We obviously wanted our experienced players to see how they could go against them and expose them to it. But knowing that we would lose, we didn't want them to play the full 60 minutes, because they would then be fatigued going into the next game. And in a World Cup, we played 7 games in 9 days. You have to manage your squad in terms of recovery and load. So we spoke about that strategy. We spoke about it with the playing group. They were on board with it. When we executed it, it wasn't comfortable for them, but we just had to keep reminding them, this is what we said we would do, and take the positives from it. We've gained experience. We picked out some video clips of some amazing plays that we did against them, and just spoke about, it's just about consistency. And if we can do it several times against this team, let's take that through to the teams that we're better benchmarked against.
Sounds very reality-based, and also that you make the best of those kind of opportunities, really.
Yeah, I would say strengths-based, and yeah, just being pragmatic about it.
Can we move on to your coaching of other coaches? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, so we support Olympic and Paralympic coaches working in the pathway, but also those coaches that go to games.
Sorry, Emily, who's we?
UK Coaching.
Okay.
As a company, we have a small team, the coaching team, which I lead. There's 5 of us in it, and we support the Olympic and Paralympic coaches. And that involves, they might come onto programs that we've designed that has certain content that we think would be useful for them. It might involve going to them in their environment and watching them coach, and just walking alongside them, experiencing their world, asking questions, having those sort of reflective conversations, and exploring how to move forwards. And that's a real privilege, because I get to see how sport is done in so many different ways. And as an example, I remember having a conversation with a sailing coach around selection. And they said in their sport, the captain and the team pick themselves, because ultimately when they're on a boat, it's life and death. So they have to trust entirely the people that are around them. And for me as a netball coach, who in our sport has experienced that the coach and a selection panel select the team, makes you stop and think, wow, okay, is there another way of doing this? And there's so many examples of that from my work supporting other coaches that lead me to be curious about the way we do things in my sport. And I just think it's helped me to be a better coach and expand my knowledge, expand my critical thinking, try new things, be innovative. I love it.
So if you had to list the top 3 qualities of a very effective coach, what would come to mind?
Authentic. So somebody who understands why they're coaching the way they are. They're not just inheriting coaching and doing it the way other people have done it. So authentic is definitely a key one. Humble, in that they are open to feedback, they're open to learning, they are open to working with others. They don't think it's all about them and they have all of the answers. And without a doubt, drive, commitment. It's a tough job coaching, especially internationally. You're away for long periods of time. You're under huge pressure to get results. It's all in the public eye. It's demanding. You've got to have the drive and you've got to love it. Otherwise, it will eat you up and you get burnt out.
And presumably you have to be resilient as well.
Absolutely. And nobody really teaches you as a coach how to be resilient. You just sort of develop the skills as you go along. And I would say now, 10 years on, I have strategies that help me to remain resilient. There's times I've had experiences and setbacks that have made me think, I don't know whether I can carry on coaching, or I felt really vulnerable. I thought, I don't know if I want to do that job or go to that competition because I felt quite exposed.
Is that a results-based feeling, as it were? Would that be when your teams weren't playing well or you were getting hammered?
No. Probably more other people's feedback of my impact and contribution. So if others had fed back something that I didn't really like to hear, or it came as a surprise to me, that would be quite a setback for me as a younger coach. Whereas now I think I've got the skills to deal with that feedback. And as a result of that, I can now put myself in more stressful positions in competition because I don't worry about that feedback that I might get.
It's a leadership role, isn't it?
You work with people. It's everything you do is with people. And what I've learned is you can't please everyone. You have to make decisions that people might not like, and it might be uncomfortable for them. And I think as a young coach, that made me feel like I was maybe doing something wrong, or I wasn't liked, or I wasn't credible. Whereas now I can detach their reaction to my decisions from my own perceived ability.
Could you perhaps give a specific example of a decision you took was not popular, but you stuck by it because of your experience?
Just, selection decisions, players that you've picked for your squad, or the amount of court time, whether you've chosen to sit a really experienced player off the court to give a younger player experience. Obviously, that's not going to be a popular decision for the person that's been taken off the court. Popular for the younger player, obviously, but, and not only will the player have an opinion on that, so will the fans, because it's very public. And now I just remind myself that there's a reason, there's a plan. I'm well supported by my performance director. I've had experiences in the past which I can draw on that tell me that this is fine. Even if people do say unkind things about you, it's fine. Yeah, and obviously just seeing other people doing it as well, that whole vicarious learning, seeing others doing it and helping you to see that, well, they've bounced back from setbacks, or they can move on from that criticism, so can I.
But take that example where you might pull an experienced player off the court and replace her with an inexperienced player. Is that a unilateral decision in the heat of the moment, or are you consulting with your team?
There's slow and fast decision making at play. So going into a game, we will have an objective for that competition, and we might have already discussed some possible scenarios that we might like to try if the situation is right. But also in the moment, you have to judge whether the situation is right or not, and you might then have to make an entirely different decision. So, for example, if we go into a game saying this is a team that are ranked above us, we're expecting to lose heavily, therefore we're going to develop 3 new players. But then you find yourself in a situation where you're 2 goals down, you scrap that plan and you go, right, now the situation's different. Let's try and get a win here, because that will also build confidence in the team. It's not that you're just greedy for results, but if you can close the gap on a team and compete with them, that will build confidence in both the experienced and inexperienced. So you make that quick decision to stick with the more experienced person. Your decision making as a coach is always that juggling act between short term, long term, pre-planned, what's being presented in front of me in the moment.
Earlier, you mentioned performance analysis and you mentioned video observations. How regularly do you do that?
So in a game, we have live stats sent to us on the bench to help inform our decisions, because you get adrenaline, you can get carried away with things, or you might be feeling quite negative about a game, and then you see these stats and you're like, oh, well, actually, we're doing all right. So we use those to inform our decision making. After the game, it's part of our processes to review, but also in training, we'll have somebody filming the session with a TV there, so that if players want to live review, go back and look at something, they can go over to the TV, rewind it, talk about it, and then try it again. So we try to integrate it as much as possible in training and games.
You're obviously an incredibly experienced and thoughtful coach, because what you're saying would apply to so many areas of sport, also to so many areas of life. Mm-hmm. But what's the barrier to there not being a lot more female coaches like you? I mean, why isn't there a female coach running a Premiership side? You would do it brilliantly.
So you're right. Everything I've spoken about is coaching and leadership, and it's relevant to sport and outside of sport. And there are women that can lead and coach. So why are they underrepresented? Lots of reasons. At the individual level, some women might, and I emphasize that word, might not have the confidence to do it. However, what we're learning is that's probably not the main reason. It's a very small reason. Their interactions with other people, often they feel overlooked, undermined, invisible. So, for example, I've had coaches say to me, at the end of a football game, I'm the head coach, the opposition come to shake everybody's hands and they shake all of my colleagues' hands, but they don't shake mine because they assume I'm not a coach or part of the coaching team. Or often women will describe someone coming into their environment and saying, oh, so who are you? Are you the physio? And quite often assumed to be in a caring role or an administration role. And these things, although they seem quite small, can make women feel a bit invalidated, like they shouldn't be there. And that constant emotional burden of having to justify yourself or make yourself noticed and having to work twice as hard to gain respect and credibility from your colleagues or the people that you're coaching is demanding. And we know that coaching is already a demanding job. Add to that extra burden, and it just doesn't seem that appealing for women, particularly in environments where traditionally women haven't coached. So you use football in your question. Traditionally, women haven't coached there. So that is a place where women have to feel they have to prove themselves and try twice as hard. But we also know that there are organisational challenges around recruitment processes. For example, jobs not being advertised transparently, or panels being dominated by men, or even the decision maker being just one person. We also know there's cultural things like stereotypes around leadership. So, for example, if you ask somebody to imagine a leader, they'll often think of a male, a white male that's authoritative, quite direct. And there are women and lots of men that don't fit that stereotype. So it then makes it hard for them to coach authentically and be an authentic leader, because people will think that they're not very credible or very good at their job. So they end up being somebody that they're not. And again, that's really tiring. And what we also know from research is when women try to be more like a traditional leader, they're respected but not liked. And then when they're more nurturing and friendly, they're liked but not respected. So they're always walking this fine line, trying to navigate which one do I want to be today. And it's exhausting.
But it is, yeah.
So there's lots of barriers at the sort of social level, organisational level, and even at the individual level with their interactions between people.
So you've been coaching for 20 years, 10 of those at international level. And in that time, do you think things have got better for women coaches? Are there more women coaches around?
I think there are more women coaches. It feels like to me there are more women coaches because I see them and they're more visible. And you see women's sport, like women's football, growing, which gives it more media coverage, more visibility. However, statistically, it's not actually improving. So what we know is that women tend to coach children and young people, and they tend to have lower qualifications, whereas men tend to coach older, more competitive levels and have higher qualifications. So there are more women in terms of visibility, but statistically it's not changing. We know the number of coaches at the Olympic level has increased, but the number that got accreditations to go to the games only changed slightly. And I think, if I'm being honest, the reason for that is because there are very good men doing those jobs already. And, you know, unless we're going to sack them, the numbers aren't going to change at the top level quickly. So I think we'll see change in time.
Emily, you've mentioned this word authentic a couple of times. I think I understand what you mean, but could you spell out what that means to you?
Yes, I think when you are being authentic, you understand your values, you understand what's important to you, and you understand how that informs the way that you lead and coach. So I said, for me, coaching is about you do it with people, not to people. So for me, those interactions, those conversations, those collaborative decision-making, the collaborative planning is all really important to me. I'm aware that that's important to me, and I can therefore make decisions about my coaching practice. If a coach or a leader isn't aware of what's important to them, then they'll just coach in a way that they see others coaching, and that's inauthentic. And people sense that when you're not being authentic, and it will only get you so far.
We're nearly at the end of our time. Could you sum up what it is about being a coach that really gets you out of bed in the morning? What you love about it?
Because you clearly do love it.
Clearly you love it.
Yeah, for me, it's the people. Wales. So I had stepped away from coaching, and after a year, I missed it. And part of the reason I stepped away is because I just had my daughter. And I reached out to a few clubs and organisations that I worked before, and they said that I couldn't get involved because they only had full-time roles. And I just wanted to do a bit of part-time. And Wales said, yeah, come in. We'll have you for a couple of sessions. And when I walked in that first session, they made me feel so welcome. And then when the head coach at the time announced that she was stepping down, I just felt so committed to these people and their goals and their aspirations that the thought of somebody else coming in at that late stage and taking them to a World Cup just didn't feel right to me. So I found myself applying for the job, and I keep doing it 2 years down the line because, of course, it's a second job on top of my full-time job. Why do I keep doing it? And I ask myself that all the time. It's the people. I just want them to enjoy it, achieve their goals. And for me, sport and coaching changed my life. And I just hope that I can be a part of it, doing the same for other people.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. It's fantastic.
We like always to finish with a light-hearted thing. So I'm going to tell you a little joke about coaching. It's a Saturday morning and it's a child's football match. And the coach calls over one of the players and says, look, do you understand the concept of cooperation, i.e. playing with other people? And the little player nods his head, yes. And he says, do you understand that it's not about winning and losing, but it's about being a member of a team and playing in a team? And the little player nods their head, yes. He said, do you understand that when the referee awards a penalty to the other side, you don't attack them and swear at them and call them brainless? And he just nods his head like this. And he says, and when I take you off and put another player on, do you understand that that's to give that player a chance as well? And the little player nods his head. So you understand all that? Yes, yes, yes. And I said, well, go and tell your mouthy parents.
Oh, dear. Thank you so much, Emily. We have to leave it there.
Thank you so much. That's been so interesting. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me.